In moments of global crisis, the most consequential decisions are often made quietly, behind closed doors, away from press briefings and public spectacle. One such decision emerged amid escalating international pressure, humanitarian catastrophe, and geopolitical maneuvering. The refusal of a major Muslim country to deploy its military forces into an active conflict zone under a proposed international stabilization framework. At first glance, this refusal was portrayed by critics as indecision or avoidance. But when examined closely, through diplomatic records, parliamentary statements, international reactions, and subsequent developments, it reveals a calculated, legally grounded, and strategically cautious stance. This documentary investigates why that decision was taken, what risks were identified, how later developments validated those concerns, and why this approach may represent a rare example of principled restraint in modern geopolitics. The initial proposal presented to several Muslim-majority countries was framed as humanitarian in nature. The stated objectives were clear and emotionally compelling: to enforce a ceasefire, to protect civilians, to enable humanitarian aid, to stabilize a devastated civilian zone, to facilitate reconstruction. These assurances resonated deeply, especially given the humanitarian emergency unfolding on the ground. The prospect of stopping daily bombardments, restoring access to food and medicine, and rebuilding shattered infrastructure aligned with both moral obligations and international humanitarian law. Based on these representations, diplomatic support was initially extended. However, support for a peace initiative is not the same as consent for military deployment, especially when the operational mandate remains unclear. As draft frameworks and operational outlines began circulating, troubling discrepancies surfaced. Key elements that had been discussed informally were absent from the final operational proposal, while new responsibilities appeared without prior consultation. Among them was a critical clause: foreign forces would be expected to disarm a local resistance group. This single detail fundamentally altered the nature of the mission. A humanitarian stabilization effort had quietly transformed into a counterinsurgency task, a forced disarmament operation, a politically explosive military engagement. From a legal standpoint, this raised immediate red flags. Under international law, disarmament without a political settlement constitutes occupation-adjacent action. Militaries sent under peacekeeping mandates cannot lawfully act as enforcement arms for unresolved political conflicts. Such operations risk violating sovereignty, self-determination principles, and neutrality standards. From a strategic standpoint, the risks were even greater. One unavoidable question dominated internal assessments. If the region's most powerful military had failed, over multiple years of sustained operations, to eliminate or disarm the armed group, how could an external Muslim force realistically succeed? There was no credible answer. Military analysts pointed out, urban insurgency cannot be resolved through external force alone. Civilian density makes disarmament operations catastrophic. External troops would inherit hostility from all sides. The mission would rapidly lose neutrality. More critically, such deployment would create an unprecedented scenario: Muslim soldiers confronting Muslim civilians and armed groups on behalf of an externally defined security agenda. This was assessed as morally corrosive, politically destabilizing, strategically indefensible. Beyond the battlefield realities, geopolitical trust played a decisive role. The proposing state maintained deep strategic alliances with regional rivals, active defense cooperation with states hostile to the deploying country, opposition to sensitive national security programs. This history generated legitimate skepticism. Strategists questioned, would deployed forces be protected diplomatically if incidents occurred? Would intelligence sharing be selective or compromised? Would Muslim troops become expendable buffers in a broader geopolitical contest? History offers many examples where peacekeeping forces were later scapegoated, sanctioned, or abandoned. That risk was deemed unacceptable. Interestingly, the refusal was not immediately announced. This was deliberate. Public rejection at an early stage would have triggered diplomatic retaliation, increased economic and political pressure, reduced maneuvering space for negotiation, exposed the country to coordinated criticism. Instead, strategic silence was maintained while parliamentary discussions occurred, legal evaluations were completed, allied positions were assessed. This restraint was later criticized, but time would prove its value. Then, an unexpected geopolitical move changed everything. A disputed territory, long regarded by international institutions as part of a sovereign African state, was unilaterally recognized as independent by the same actor promoting the peace plan. This recognition occurred without UN approval, against African Union consensus, in defiance of regional and Islamic organizations, despite decades of established territorial norms. The reaction was swift and severe. This was not a symbolic act. Recognition of disputed breakaway regions undermines international borders, encourages separatist movements, weakens post-colonial state stability, creates dangerous legal precedents. African states warned that this decision could ignite fragmentation across the continent. It validated unilateral secession without negotiation. It threatened regional peace far beyond one territory. Islamic organizations echoed these concerns, highlighting the broader implications for Muslim-majority states facing internal divisions. Investigative reporting and international media leaks revealed a deeper concern. The recognized territory had reportedly been explored through informal channels as a potential destination for displaced civilians from the conflict zone. If confirmed, this would amount to forced population transfer, permanent demographic engineering, violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, ethnic and political cleansing under humanitarian cover. This revelation reframed the entire peace initiative. What was presented as stabilization now appeared linked to relocation, not restorate. Following the recognition decision, Islamic blocs issued joint condemnations. African institutions rejected the move. Arab states publicly reassessed their earlier support. Countries previously open to troop deployment began withdrawing commitments. What had once seemed inevitable now appeared politically toxic. This moment marked a rare alignment between legal principle, regional stability, moral accountability. At this point, the earlier refusal to deploy troops took on new meaning. The concerns initially dismissed as speculation were now substantiated by international reactions, reinforced by legal objections, confirmed through shifting diplomatic alliances. Caution had not delayed peace, it had prevented complicity. This case offers an important lesson in modern diplomacy. Positive outcomes of the refusal include avoidance of military entanglement, preservation of neutrality, protection of soldiers from morally compromising missions, prevention of sectarian conflict, upholding international legal standards. Rather than rejecting peace, this approach demanded credible peace, one rooted in political settlement, local consent, legal legitimacy, regional stability. This is not obstructionism. This is responsible statecraft. True peace cannot be built on forced migration, demographic manipulation, proxy enforcement, silence on violations. Peace must prioritize civilian protection without relocation, reconstruction without erasure, security without occupation, justice without selectivity. The international community now faces a choice: repeat historical mistakes or redefine peace itself. In a world where speed is often mistaken for leadership, restraint is frequently misunderstood as weakness. But history judges differently. Sometimes the most courageous decision is not to march, but to refuse, not to comply, but to question, not to deploy, but to defend principles. This investigation shows that caution, when grounded in law, ethics, and foresight, can be an act of leadership, one that may ultimately protect not just national interests, but regional and global stability. This documentary is produced strictly for educational, informational, and journalistic purposes. The content presented herein is based on publicly available information, international media reporting, official statements, historical records, and analytical interpretation. It does not claim to represent absolute truth, classified intelligence, or undisclosed government positions. This program does not promote violence, hatred, or hostility against any state, government, institution, religion, ethnicity, or group. Any discussion of military actions, political decisions, or international disputes is conducted solely in the context of analysis, accountability, and public interest journalism. All opinions expressed are those of an independent third-party journalistic perspective and are intended to encourage critical thinking, lawful debate, and informed discourse. They should not be construed as legal advice, policy advocacy, or an official position of any government, organization, or individual. No allegation stated should be interpreted as judicial findings. Viewers are encouraged to verify information independently, consult multiple sources, and form their own conclusions. This content is protected under principles of freedom of expression, press freedom, and fair use for commentary, criticism, and education. In times of global conflict, narratives move faster than facts. Decisions are framed as inevitable, pressure is disguised as consensus, and silence is often mistaken for agreement. But history reminds us of one essential truth. Not every plan presented as peace leads to justice. This investigation was not about taking sides. It was about asking difficult questions. Questions about legality, questions about consequences, questions about who bears the cost when decisions are rushed, mandates are blurred, and humanitarian language masks geopolitical agendas. True peace cannot be enforced at gunpoint. It cannot be outsourced to proxies. And it cannot be built on displacement, coercion, or strategic silence. Responsible leadership, whether by states or institutions, requires restraint, transparency, and the courage to say no when the cost of yes is too high. The story is still unfolding, the pressure continues, and the world is watching. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you believe investigative journalism matters, support independent reporting, share this work responsibly, and continue questioning the narratives that shape our world.